So in terms of industry evolution, there are a couple of things that we need to remember, and I might have finished off with this in the previous set of lectures. I wasn't feeling great, unfortunately. In terms of the development phase, so we tend to think of the industry line to look a bit like that. I'm not the best person to draw with a mouse, but the early adopters, these are those individuals that are always ahead of the curve, and these are individuals that essentially will test new technologies, and also the kinds of individuals that don't mind if those technologies aren't perfect, but it is to have something new. It is to have something that they can play with and something that they can test. Now, in terms of early adopters, I'm not sure in terms of, for example, the video type, movie type industry, where we're at from an early adopters phase. The growth phase, obviously, when people start generally accepting that the new technology is working and that's the future. In terms of DSTV, I think DSTV is somewhere here and Netflix is somewhere here. Having said that, we've also seen a significant decline in terms of Netflix. It's going to be interesting to see what the next wave is in terms of traditional movies. I think cinemas are sitting over there. I don't think many people go to cinema, but I might also still have that wrong. And it shows you the different phases, and at different phases, obviously, different customers and different approaches to marketing. And every industry will go through that. And we've seen how industries have revived. The vinyl industry, for example, cigars, which has become quite again acceptable as a means of expressing yourself. The gin industry made a significant return as well, and I think gin was just remarketed. But every industry will go through these different phases, and once you get here, we wait for a new innovation, a new invention to spark a move forward. So you can have a look at the cellular industry in terms of industry life cycles, and they clearly link to technology life cycle. So often in terms of those early adopter type individuals, these are individuals that are always ahead of the curve, and they will migrate to the new technologies. So it's if we think of Netflix, it's those people that had Netflix when no one else believed Netflix to be the future. So these people essentially become the sort of test ground for whether this technology will take off. And as I said, they often don't mind if this isn't perfect. In terms of the kinds of technologies that we have sustaining, those will be around forever, and they tend to last over long periods of time, and they tend to be the standard. So when we think of your traditional DVD and video type rental blockbuster places, they were around for extended periods of time. And then obviously DSTV, and more importantly Netflix, happened, and all of a sudden we had disruptive technologies and the entire industry was redefined. And I know that around South Africa there are still a couple of DVD rental places, but those are for those individuals that are clinging to the old ways, that are clinging to the traditional ways of watching movie. I also know of people who still have VHSs, and I know that some of you won't know what VHSs are. So sustaining technologies, they're consistent over time, and essentially will survive the industry. We think of electric vehicles. Now there is this belief that we're going to adopt electric vehicles. The simple truth is electric vehicles don't make any sense. So obviously the use of petrol, and we know that it's at the end of their cycle, and we know that we have the sort of hybrid vehicles getting close to maturity, and then electric vehicles will act as a disruptive technology and redefine the industry. Having said that, we are nowhere near getting electric vehicles off the ground in South Africa. They're exorbitantly expensive, but we produce 90% of our energy needs through coal-fired power stations. So it makes no sense to burn coal in order to charge our motor vehicles to reduce the impact on the environment. So in terms of the industry analyses that we have to look at, I think the first one is to look at the organization itself, but in particular, how it interacts with its competitors and its customers. So a competitor analysis framework gives us an idea of where the individual competitors are in terms of a particular industry, what their plans are, what their strategic initiatives are, what their next moves are. And we use competitive intelligence for that. And we spoke about competitive intelligence as taking raw data and turning it into information, and turning that into information into something that will give you a competitive advantage. And part of that is to understand what our competitors' future goals are, also to understand what our stakeholders expect from us, and the assumptions about the industry. So the current assumptions about the auto industry is that we're moving to autonomous vehicles. Again, I don't know how far we are away from that in South Africa. Also, the move to electric vehicles. Again, we don't know how far we are away from that in South Africa. But certainly we've seen assumptions change in terms of that. If you think of the original landlines, and I don't even think you guys will remember landlines, there's a hilarious video doing the rounds on Facebook of 17-year-olds trying to use a traditional dial-up phone and having no idea how that old dialed round phone would work. But it is, I mean, that's so long ago, and now the industry assumption is that your communications devices are mobile. They're not connected to anything. They use different spaces to operate in. Some of the more future operating areas in terms of business is the metaverse, where things are run in using the internet and using enhanced and augmented intelligence and those kinds of technologies. So we see that as well as a change in terms of where the way we do work is going. And then competitor analysis. And I think the one thing we know in terms of organizations is that we need to get a sense of the kinds of organizations we compete with, their strategies, their approaches, their moves, so that we can counter that and how they would counter us. So the strategic group is a group of organizations that are very similar to South Africa. So Audi, we would argue, is very similar to Mercedes, is very similar to BMW. So they would be a cluster in terms of their own competition. In terms of the kinds of factors that we need to look at when we consider a strategic group, the first one is mobility factors, and it's how well can we protect ourselves against new entrants. And when we think of BMW, Audi, and Mercedes, you know, we've seen attempts at entry, and obviously Lexus is one of those. We know that Nissan came in very briefly in terms of the Infinity. We know that Volvo hangs around there, but it's very difficult to establish a footprint in that particular industry. And then also in terms of those groups, we have to look at the number of groups. So we would argue that Volkswagen and Toyota compete in a different area than BMW and Audi. The distance between those groups, again, and we see in terms of this modern approach where we provide value for money, that we provide really good value for money. Toyota does it really well. But how far is a Toyota away from a Lexus? And how much more would people be prepared to pay for a Lexus? And then also the idea of how those market segments and differentiation overlap. So we see Toyota provide really good quality in terms of their vehicles and great value for money. And in certain instances, we can argue almost dips a toe in the sort of more luxury vehicle class. But there's definitely a difference between a Lexus and a Toyota. And then the impact of the bargaining power of buyers and suppliers. And I think the simple truth is when we use the same supplier, we sell to the same customers, I think it is tough to compete, because it depends on the ability of the company to switch suppliers and the customers to move away from certain brands. And I think sometimes it also adds a bit of bargaining strength to the customers. And then substitution and what alternatives are available. And I suppose in terms of vehicles now, the substitution could potentially be electric vehicles, but we're far away from that, to be honest with you. And then we look at customer analysis. So we look at the segment we compete in, how unique it is, what the needs of customers are in that segment versus other segments, how attractive that segment is to us in terms of what makes us special as an organization. You guys will also remember the non-negotiables in terms of those key success factors, where every segment would have their own set of standards, those non-negotiables. So in terms of mobile technologies, we know that cloud technology is a non-negotiable. The ability to integrate devices is a non-negotiable. And then obviously the mobility is the non-negotiable. And then the scope of the segmentation. It means how well and how many sub-markets there are within a particular industry. Okay. Guys, we'll leave that there